The Waverly Hills Sanatorium is one of the scariest haunted locations I've ever heard about. From ghostly figures to disembodied voices, creepy shadowy figures that crawl up the walls and into the ceilings, it is one of the most terrifying places in the world. But if you know me, you know I have to get into the history about this place. So in the late 1800s, Major Thomas H. Hayes bought a plot of land in Jefferson County, Kentucky, with dreams of building a home for his growing family. So Major Hayes and his family moved into this charming red brick house that was perched halfway up a large hill on the property. And while the property seemed like the perfect place to settle down, there was a problem. There weren't any schools nearby for his children to attend. But as he explored the property further, he came across a small one-room frame building at the base of the hill just across from their home. He saw an opportunity and arranged to use the building as a private school for his children and several other children in the community. And he hired a teacher named Lizzie Lee Harris to run it. Now, Miss Harris loved Walter Scott's Waverly novels so much so that she named the schoolhouse Waverly School. Thomas loved the name. He thought it sounded so peaceful and elegant, and he decided to call his entire property Waverly Hill. But while Thomas and his family were busy building their lives, a much darker reality was spreading across the country. During the 18th and 19th centuries, tuberculosis was claiming millions of lives around the world. This disease wasn't new. It had been around throughout much of human history, but by this point, it had reached epidemic proportions. By the early 1900s, Louisville, Kentucky had one of the highest tuberculosis death rates in the entire country. The disease was spreading rapidly, and the city's geography didn't help. It was built on low, swampy land that provided the perfect environment for this TB bacteria to thrive. Combine that with industrial pollution and overcrowded neighborhoods, and it was a disaster waiting to happen. Entire families and communities were being wiped out by the disease. And back then, there was no cure for tuberculosis. The specific antibiotic used in TB treatment wouldn't be discovered until the 1940s, so doctors had to get creative, and that's when the idea of sanatoriums came into play. The concept was simple: provide lots of fresh air, sunlight, and isolation from the general public in hopes of slowing the spread of the disease and giving patients a chance to recover. By 1906, the Board of Tuberculosis Hospital was formed with the goal of providing care to the citizens of Jefferson County, Kentucky, and they had a $25,000 budget to build a facility that would do so. So the board purchased Thomas's Waverly Hills and began construction on a two-story wooden sanatorium, which officially opened its doors in July of 1910. It was very small, designed to house around 40 patients in the early stages of tuberculosis, but demand for care was overwhelming right from the start. People were desperate, and Waverly Hills quickly became overcrowded with patients seeking treatment. In the years that followed, the sanatorium was expanded to try and keep up. They added more beds, a nurse training school, and even a children's pavilion. But even with the expansions, the wooden structure couldn't handle the constant strain. It was always in need of repairs, and no matter what they did, it simply wasn't big enough to accommodate everyone who needed help. So in 1924, construction started on something much bigger, a 5-story building sturdy enough to last and large enough to hold more than 400 patients in all stages of TB. When it finally opened in October of 1926, Waverly Hills was cutting edge, a spacious 180,000 square foot facility with open air pavilions. Patients even had access to their own telephones, radios, and solarium porches so they could soak in this fresh air and sunlight in hopes of getting better. But as advanced as the facility was, the treatments for tuberculosis were another story entirely. Some were simple, like giving patients plenty of sunlight and fresh air, but other treatments were incredibly brutal. One procedure involved surgically inserting balloons into a patient's lungs and inflating them, and another required removing ribs and muscles from the chest to create more space. These procedures were as painful as they were risky. Many patients didn't survive the operations, and those who did were often left to endure weeks of agony before the disease ultimately claimed them. Death was a constant reality at Waverly Hills. At its worst, the sanatorium reportedly saw as many as 6 deaths per hour. Just imagine being a patient there, hoping to get better while being surrounded by so much loss every single day. It must have been heartbreaking. To keep the patients from seeing just how many people were dying, and to avoid upsetting the patients still fighting for their lives, the staff came up with a way to quietly move the bodies without anyone noticing. They used a hidden supply tunnel, now known as the body chute, that stretched from the building down the hill to a set of railroad tracks. Some say after they moved these bodies through the tunnels, they would use a motorized rail system to lower the bodies into waiting train cars, while others believe these bodies were carried out to a hearse parked at the bottom of the hill. But there are darker stories about what happened after a patient died. Some claim bodies were stacked in storage rooms or hung on meat hooks, but it's hard to know how much of that is actually true. By the 1940s, everything began to change. The antibiotic, which finally helped control tuberculosis, was discovered, death rates dropped, and places like Waverly Hills were no longer needed. So in June of 1961, the sanatorium closed its doors. But the building didn't stay empty for long. In 1962, it reopened as Woodhaven Medical Services, a nursing home for elderly patients. There were allegations of abuse, cockroach infestations, and medical malpractice. Now, the details of what happened inside Woodhaven were never fully revealed, but there were plenty of rumors. owners. And in 1982, the state shut it down for good. After that, there were talks of turning it into a minimum security prison or even apartments, but nothing ever came of those plans. Eventually, the property ended up in the hands of Robert Alberhaskey, the founder of the Christ the Redeemer Foundation. He wanted to place this massive statue of Jesus on the roof and convert the rest of the building into a chapel, theater, and gift shop. Because there weren't any sizable donations, the plan fell apart and Robert ditched the property in December of 1997, leaving it abandoned until 2001, when it was purchased by Tina and Charlie Mattingly. They did work to restore the building, but during the years it sat abandoned, many people walked inside coming out with chilling stories to share. Some say they've seen the ghost of a little girl or a boy named Timmy who walks around the halls just looking to play ball. There have been reports of slamming doors, unexplained lights flickering in the windows, and more than one person has claimed to see a man dressed in white drifting through the corridors. But the most chilling and sinister entity tied to Waverly Hills is known as the Creeper. This shadowy figure is said to haunt the 4th floor, and it can be seen crawling up the walls and into the ceiling. And then there's the most haunted location, the 5th floor, specifically room 502. There, visitors have reported shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and an overwhelming sense of unease. The most infamous stories tied to room 502 involve 2 nurses, both of which took their lives, one in 1928 and the other in 1932, but there's no hard evidence or any records to back these stories up. Today, visitors can explore the grounds, take guided tours, and even participate in their own paranormal investigations to see for themselves if the stories are real. Would you ever visit the Waverly Hills Sanatorium? If you have visited the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, comment your experience down below. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Make sure you're following me on YouTube. YouTube is where I'll be. It's linked in my bio along with all of my other socials. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been there to support me, watch my videos. You guys are amazing. I can't believe I have been doing this for 5 years now. 5 years ago, I posted my first ever video. Some of you have been here that long, some of you are new, and I'm grateful for each and every single one of you.